Welcome to Partnered Up Business Law, Deals, and Dynamics.
Welcome to Partnered Up Business Law, Deals, and Dynamics with Jeff Fink, partner at Core Lichtenstein LLP in Massachusetts. Jeff advises business owners and partners on formation growth and disputes resolutions for closely held companies. I'm Evan Mack, and today we're focusing on how law firms divide profits, a challenge that's uniquely complex inside professional partnerships. Other types of businesses face different pressures, but in law firms, the mix of fairness, trust, and ego can make compensation one of the hardest conversations a firm will ever have. Jeff, welcome, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Absolutely. Jeff, you've seen plenty of firms, wrestle with this compensation. Could you share a story about one that looked healthy on the surface, but was already showing strain underneath?
Sure. This was a firm, maybe 8 or 10 people. When it started off, one partner, it was a little bit smaller, but one partner had the bulk of the business. And so they divided things up with fixed percentage interest. They call them points, like in venture capital firms. And then the problem is they weren't flexible. So over time, when the business of the initial rainmaker waned and the business of everybody else increased, they started fighting over money and control. It was a good lesson for me in how money and control can be intertwined. And it didn't work out well for them. The firm ended up breaking up over it.
Well, why do conversations about partner pay seem to trigger more tension in law firms than in other professional settings, in your opinion?
Because you're dealing with lawyers.
Yeah.
We've been known to have strong personalities and fragile egos. People always compare themselves to others, but lawyers are no exception to that. Plus, in every partnership, whether it's lawyers or not, there's a potential issue that I always used to call toxic flypaper. Although then I learned the psychologists have a name for it. They call it fundamental attribution error. Basically, anything the good that happens is due to my effort, and anything bad that happens is your fault somehow. In any business, there's good, there's bad, there's ups, there's downs. And people can have an unrealistic view of their role and, frankly, their value. And I think, we all kind of know that intuitively without putting name to it. And for obvious reasons, money discussions tend to bring that out. Plus, especially in the hourly billing world, where there's sharing of income that relates directly to how hard people are working, it gets really personal. Like, I'm working really hard. Why am I supporting these slackers?
Right.
Never a good feeling. At the same time, everybody's business goes up and down. Sometimes we have to work harder, sometimes not so much. And you kind of have to decide, do partners want to keep more of what they do in a good year in exchange for not having as much of a firm safety net on down years? And one of the reasons that conversation is hard is, well, one, because it's hard, and two, is the way that people think about it can mirror the way that people think about politics, frankly. And that's something that a lot of us try to keep out of the office.
So Jeff, many firms start with that strong founding partner who sets the tone and the pay. What kind of culture tends to grow around that model?
So there are about, I would say, half a dozen or so major ways to divide up law firm partnership income. Along a spectrum of how centralized the control over the money is. And, at one end is this idea of the strong founder that brings in a lot of business and demands a say in everything. And from the perspective of that strong founding partner, which may be valid, you see yourself as vital to everything. And so
Right.
As a result, you expect people around you to be very deferential and treat you with a high level of respect. Sometimes independent personalities don't do well in that environment, and they vote with their feet. And among the people who stay, that founding partner really sets the tone for the firm as a whole. And what that looks like depends on the founder. Often enough, it works for a while. After all, the founder is the one who drew that core group together. And if business is strong, there's enough money coming in, everyone does okay. But things can go wrong, especially when the founder controls compensation. The incentive is to get as close to the founder as possible and do what they want. They're yes people. And over time, that can lead to bad business decisions, lack of accountability, And ultimately, the firm may not plan for the day the founder isn't around anymore. It can be an environment with very little room for advancement for associates. So you don't really have younger people coming up who can be the partners of the future, at least unless the business of the boss man is growing. Interestingly, that's a little off topic, but it's a pattern that the organizational development consultants see in big, older organizations. The telephone company, for instance, is a classic example of that. It's a groupthink, and nobody wanted to upset the apple cart about anything.
Some firms use this compensation, the compensation committees to decide income distribution. What works about that approach, and where does it usually start to break down with your experience?
Well, that's a great question. And let's start by defining what we mean by a comp committee, a compensation committee or executive committee that makes monetary decisions about partners without a lot of external standards is the next step in decentralization. And it can look an awful lot like that strong founder model. The way it works is that there's a committee that decides how to divide up firm profits. Once a year or so, everybody becomes a supplicant to the committee members, telling them how great they are and how much better next year will be. And if the expectations are clear and people think their personal goals align with those expectations, and most importantly, if the dollars are big enough, most partners see the results as being fair enough for them to stick around. Where it goes wrong is when the expectations aren't clear or when they don't align with the way people want to run their practices. So the incentive increasingly becomes to develop strong personal relationships with the committee members, and that creates little fiefdoms because everybody wants to be expanded to the person who controls the purse. One way that firms protect against that is having the members of the committee rotate off regularly. So it's a good check on their power and influence.
Others take that production-based route where each partner's income follows the work they generate. What kind of behavior does that system reward, and what challenges come with that?
It's a really common approach, especially in smaller firms, but in some bigger firms have variation of it. It really appeals to this strong strain of individualism in our larger culture. And it also may appeal to people coming in from other firms who've had bad experiences with the way that the money gets divided up. The good thing about formulas is they make incentives clear. They encourage people to work toward whatever goals are built into the formulas, which is usually the development of their own businesses. Firms that have a really strong formula-based approach will market themselves to other lawyers as having less pressure on people to perform at a really high level year after year after year. So if you need to take a step back for personal reasons when you're not letting anyone else down. One of the challenges is helping to create the culture of actually being in a firm instead of just sharing resources. And usually the way that happens is a formula that shows how people can share income under certain circumstances. So one way that's really common is, in fact, almost universal, is some kind of credit for originating work that other people do. All of us in any kind of service business are filter feeders, really. There's stuff that comes to us that we don't do that we're too busy to handle, even if it's stuff that we do. One of the reasons that law firms survive and thrive is a little attention to cross-selling. It can go a long way to creating both economic and those kind of intangible, firmy feeling connections between the partners. A lot of firms have that credit built into their formulas one way or another. Usually works out to about 20%. But I know of at least one firm, decent sized firm, that has people negotiated with each and every referral they do, I think, because most of the people work in silos most of the time. But it really all comes down to what it is the firm wants to incentivize. If they do that consciously and think about what they want to incentivize. Another thing with formulas is that some firms use a dollar for dollar allocation. Like, I brought in $100, the firm's going to keep 30, I get the rest. Others look at overall firm profits and divide it up, which again, incentivizes people to think about what overall firm profits look like. And even in the first group, sometimes there's a portion of total profits that are shared among the partners. So there's a range. There's a range. Again, depends on what you want your culture to be.
So yeah, Jeff, a few firms hold on to that, that fixed share equal partner models. When can that approach kind of strengthen unity? When does it create resentment on the flip side?
So that's an old-fashioned approach. A lot of firms used to have that, much more than they do now. 20, 30 years ago, it was really common. So the standard approach is that everybody who became partner in a certain year made the same amount of money. So at some point after 5 or 7 years, everybody's in the same boat, and you're carried along for the rest of your time at the firm as long as people want you there. The thinking behind it was twofold. So as younger partners develop more business on their own, they'll grow into the higher earning capacity. They contribute more to the bottom line. And older partners should be rewarded based on the work they've done to bring the firm to its current place. It has advantages and disadvantages. Advantages that it's clear, and the incentive is to stick around for as long as possible and work hard. So there's not as much room for that perception of unfairness. If you're a fourth year partner and you have a great year, you're supporting people who didn't do as well, but next year is a bubble, you'll be supported too.
So most successful firms, they end up blending those kind of systems together, maybe multiple systems. What helps leadership find a balance between maybe that flexibility or predictability?
When I do law firm partnership agreements for people, my clients always want to jump right into compensation. They open up the draft and they turn to page 7 and this is what we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
And the leader of the project to do or redo the agreement usually evaluates any suggestion that I have or that anyone else has about alternatives. Is what am I going to make next year based on that? And does that seem so fairness is in the mind of the beholder. It means different things to different people. So I usually start with a different set of questions, which is tell me what your culture is like now and what kind of culture you want to create. Do you want a bunch of individuals who don't work with each other and just share resources, or do you want to share more? What kind of practice do you have? Does it require people to work together? Do you want to encourage that? So there are a lot more issues in a law firm partnership than money, like management and hierarchy. Once upon a time, office space was a lot more important than it is now, but sometimes it's a real hotspot because of how it makes people see their relative importance within the firm. Who gets the corner office? Same thing drives these questions as drives money questions. What's your culture like?
And finally, at the heart of all of this is, I believe, is trust. So when compensation becomes a sore spot, how can partners rebuild that trust before damage starts to spread?
Depending on the firm, we have to work through a process of trying to get as many people as possible on the same page, and that then drives the answer to any other questions that come up. First off, just to state the obvious, you have to have enough money to keep going. There's no question. I don't want to suggest that that's not important and really ultimately what we're talking about here. But if distrust takes root, it will split the firm sooner or later. Distrust happens over money when people don't think the economic split is fair, or because they see others taking advantage of them. It's as if they found one of their partners raiding their checking account for personal expenses. And by the way, that happens even in law firms. And if it does, you better check your trust accounts and deal with it immediately, or else you may be looking at a lawyer discipline concern yourself. And we've all heard those stories. They do happen. With your partners, have a frank conversation about what you see as fair, what you see as right. Get outside help. Talk to someone about how you can come up with some kind of hybrid model with elements of multiple approaches that may seem more fair. Talk about what kind of culture you want your firm to have and how you see it going in the wrong direction. And keep in mind that if there's one toxic holdout, maybe that person doesn't belong with the firm anymore.
Well said, Jeff. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Alrighty. That's it for today's episode of Partnered Up, Business Law, Deals, and Dynamics. To learn more about Jeff Fink and his work at Core Liechtenstein LLP, visit cl-lawgroup.com. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to like, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who might need it as well. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.